Picture this. Your name was Eric. You were 15 years old when the dragon ships appeared on the horizon near your English coastal village in the year 932. Just hours ago, you were helping your father repair fishing nets, dreaming of someday sailing to distant lands yourself. Now your hands are bound behind your back as you're shoved into a Norse longhouse that reeks of burning peat, fermented ale, and something else. Something that makes your stomach clench with dread. The acrid smoke burns your nostrils, while shadows dance across carved dragon heads that seem to mock your terror. Your bare feet slip on wooden planks, made slick with spilled mead as warriors grab at your torn clothing. Behind you, other prisoners weep quietly, but the seasoned captives have learned to stay silent. Their hollow eyes tell you they know what's coming. You don't. Not yet. The chieftain rises from his carved throne, his beard braided with gold rings torn from the fingers of your dead neighbors. He points at you with a scarred finger, speaking words in Old Norse that you can't understand, but somehow know will seal your fate. The hall erupts in cheers as hands reach for you from every direction, and you realize this isn't about ransom or even slavery. This is about something much worse. What's about to happen to you represents just one night in a system of sexual terror that stretched across 3 centuries and consumed hundreds of thousands of victims like yourself. These weren't random acts of battlefield violence, but carefully crafted weapons of psychological warfare that made Viking expansion possible through sheer horror. You think Viking culture was about brave warriors and epic adventures? Here's what the History Channel doesn't show you. Behind every raid, every conquest, every settlement, was a machine designed to break human beings like you in the most personal ways possible. What happened to captives in longhouses like this one was so effective at destroying enemy morale that entire kingdoms would surrender rather than risk their people facing these fates. The flickering flames illuminate faces painted with anticipation. Everyone in this hall, from grizzled veterans to curious children, considers what's about to happen to you entertainment worthy of celebration. They've gathered to witness rituals that will haunt you for whatever remains of your life. One particular thing they're about to do to Eric was so brutal that hardened warriors would throw down their axes and beg for quick death rather than endure it. Between 700 and 1100 CE, Norse raiders perfected the most sophisticated system of intimate terror in European history. This wasn't the work of individual sadists, but a cultural institution that involved entire communities in the systematic degradation of human beings like Eric for profit, power, and religious devotion. The archaeological evidence tells a story that saga writers later try to hide. Excavations at sites like Birka and Hedeby reveal specialized structures designed for the public humiliation of captives. Bone analysis shows patterns of trauma that can only be explained by systematic sexual violence inflicted on victims across all age groups. These weren't battlefields, but processing centers for human cargo. Recent discoveries have forced historians to confront uncomfortable truths about Viking expansion. The scale becomes clear when you examine trade records from major Viking ports. Conservative estimates suggest that during peak raiding years, over 40,000 people annually were taken captive across Europe. Most faced immediate execution or forced labor, but roughly 15% were reserved for special treatment, designed to terrorize enemy populations into submission without costly warfare. What made Norse practices particularly effective was their integration with law, religion, and economics. The Gulating law specifically protected warriors' rights to treat captives however they wished, while offering victims no legal recourse. Religious texts portrayed gods who engaged in various forms of sexual violence, making such behavior divinely inspired rather than criminal. Foreign chroniclers struggled to describe what they witnessed in Viking territories. A Frankish monk writing in 851 reported rituals that made veteran soldiers refuse to enter captured settlements. These weren't isolated incidents, but standard procedures that accompanied every successful raid, turning military conquest into psychological warfare. The economic dimension reveals systematic organization that rivals modern trafficking operations. Viking merchants developed specialized markets for human cargo, with detailed pricing structures based on age, appearance, and origin. Account ledgers from Bergen show that intimate slaves commanded higher prices than skilled craftsmen, reflecting their perceived value to Norse society. Archaeological analysis of Viking settlements shows how thoroughly violence shaped daily life. Children grew up watching public degradation as entertainment. Women learned to expect systematic abuse as normal household management, and men competed to devise creative methods of breaking human spirits. 3 centuries of institutionalized terror created a culture where empathy was weakness and cruelty demonstrated divine favor. The psychological profiles of Viking communities show classic markers of societies built on systematic abuse. High rates of domestic violence, casual cruelty toward animals and dependents, and inability to form stable alliances with neighboring peoples, all stemmed from cultural foundations that celebrated terror as proof of social status and religious devotion. DNA evidence from medieval Scandinavian populations reveals massive influxes of foreign genetic material consistent with systematic forced breeding programs. Maternal lineages show patterns of reproductive coercion that support saga accounts of multi-generational systems operating across the Norse world for centuries. Christian missionaries who encountered Viking sexual practices often abandoned conversion efforts entirely, reporting back to Rome that these peoples were beyond salvation due to behaviors too horrific for civilized minds to comprehend. Some missionary accounts were destroyed by church authorities, who deemed them too disturbing for preservation in holy archives. The sophisticated legal frameworks supporting sexual violence demonstrate how completely Norse society had institutionalized human degradation. The law codes didn't just permit abuse, but specified procedures for handling human property, resolving disputes over access rights, and punishing resistance with escalating brutality. But understanding the systematic nature of Norse intimate terror tells only part of the story. The real horror lies in what happened to individuals like Eric, whose suffering was carefully designed to send messages that would echo across medieval Europe long after the last longship returned home. Modern attempts to romanticize Viking culture as brave exploration and noble warfare represent historical denial that dishonors countless victims like Eric, whose broken bodies built the foundation of Norse expansion. These weren't heroes seeking adventure, but predators who refined human suffering into an art form that funded their civilization through systematic terror. The evidence scattered across Scandinavian archaeological sites tells the true story of Viking success. It wasn't superior seamanship or warrior courage that made expansion possible, but a willingness to inflict violence so extreme that enemies would surrender entire territories rather than risk their populations experiencing what was about to happen to Eric in that longhouse. The moment the Viking raiders dragged Eric and the other captives into that longhouse, a systematic process began that was designed to destroy human identity before resistance could take root. What Eric witnessed in that smoky hall was just the opening ceremony of a ritual degradation program that could last for months and was refined through centuries of practice. The initial sorting happened immediately. Raiders separated prisoners into categories based on age, physical condition, and perceived social value. Eric, young and unmarked by hard labor, was marked for use. The elderly villagers faced immediate execution as burdens not worth feeding through winter months. The strong men were designated for hard labor in distant settlements. But Eric faced something far worse than death or slavery. He was stripped naked before the entire raiding party and subjected to public examination that served multiple psychological functions. Vikings were assessing his physical condition, checking for diseases, and beginning the mental destruction that would make future resistance impossible. The examination process was deliberately designed to shatter dignity. Eric was forced into degrading positions while warriors inspected his body like livestock being evaluated for market value. When he tried to cover himself, iron hands yanked his arms away. The message was clear from the first moment. Your body belongs to us now. Next came the marking ritual. A red-hot iron seared into Eric's shoulder, branding him with a symbol indicating his new status in Norse society. The pain was excruciating. But worse was the psychological message. This mark wasn't just identification, but a permanent reminder that he was no longer Eric, the fisherman's son, but property of his Norse captors. The warriors laughed as Eric screamed, passing around drinking horns filled with ale while his flesh sizzled. Children in the hall watched with the same casual interest they'd show for any other household chore. To them, this was normal entertainment, as routine as sharpening weapons or mending nets. Transport to the permanent settlement involved additional layers of systematic humiliation. Eric was chained to other captives in positions that maximized discomfort while allowing raiders easy access for continued abuse during the 3-week journey north. He learned quickly that compliance might reduce suffering but would never eliminate it entirely. Upon arrival at the Viking settlement, Eric faced what survivors later described as the welcome ceremony. This community ritual involved every resident and established the social order that would govern his existence. Men, women, and children participated in activities designed to demonstrate his complete powerlessness and integration into Norse society as property rather than a person. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and devastatingly effective. Eric was required to participate in his own degradation, forced to thank his captors for basic necessities like moldy bread and fouled water. He learned that displaying emotion or mentioning his former life would trigger punishment that made his current suffering seem mild by comparison. Religious justification made this process even more psychologically damaging. The degradation of Eric and other captives was framed as offerings to gods who demanded human suffering as proof of devotion. Before we dive into the most disturbing part, subscribe and hit that like button if you can handle what's coming next, and definitely comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I think it's incredible that people across the world are connected by the same curiosity about the darkest parts of human history. Once the initial breaking process was complete, Eric entered the thrall system, a form of human ownership that went far beyond simple slavery to encompass complete control over every aspect of existence. This wasn't just about forced labor, but about treating Eric as property available for any purpose his owner desired. Eric lived in specialized quarters, designed to maximize control, while providing convenient access for his owner and associates. Archaeological excavations have revealed these buildings featured restraint systems, observation points, and communal areas, where multiple captives like Eric could be housed together to prevent individual relationships from forming that might threaten owner authority. His daily routine involved constant availability to his master Bjorn and anyone Bjorn chose to grant access. This could include honored guests, business partners, or reward systems for loyal followers. Eric learned that his body was currency in a social economy, where intimate access demonstrated status and sealed agreements between free Norse citizens. The physical toll on Eric's body was devastating and intentional. Within months, his once healthy frame had become gaunt from irregular feeding and constant stress. Bruises covered his arms and back from daily beatings designed to maintain submission. Most disturbing were the internal injuries from repeated violations that left him in constant pain but unable to seek relief. The legal framework surrounding Eric's ownership was comprehensive and ruthless. Law codes specified exactly how human property like him could be treated, what punishments were appropriate for resistance, and how disputes over access rights should be resolved. These weren't informal arrangements, but legally protected systems of human exploitation backed by community enforcement. Most disturbing was how Eric's abuse became normalized within Bjorn's household. Free women learned to accept his presence as routine aspects of domestic management, often participating in his punishment or training. Bjorn's children grew up witnessing systematic abuse as normal household operations, sometimes using Eric for their own entertainment. The economic dimensions created additional layers of horror for Eric. He was valuable property that could be bought, sold, traded, or used as collateral for debts. His market value fluctuated based on his appearance and condition, with detailed accounting systems tracking his worth like livestock or farm equipment. The psychological toll was devastating and intentionally designed to create permanent damage. Eric was systematically prevented from forming emotional bonds with other thralls or maintaining hope for rescue. When he began forming a friendship with another English captive, they were separated, and the other boy was sold to a settlement 3 days' journey away. Eric was rotated between different masters to prevent adaptation, isolated from potential allies, and subjected to unpredictable punishment schedules designed to create learned helplessness. Some days brought relative peace. Others brought hours of abuse for no reason he could understand. By his second winter in captivity, Eric had become what the Vikings considered a successful thrall. He had completely internalized his degradation, responding to summons without resistance and helping to train new captives in proper submission techniques. The boy who had once dreamed of adventure was gone, replaced by a broken shell who existed only to serve his captor's desires. The horror of Eric's existence extended beyond individual ownership into community rituals that involved entire populations in systematic human degradation. He wasn't just Bjorn's property, but community entertainment, available for use during festivals and religious ceremonies that strengthened social bonds through shared participation in his suffering. The concept of nid involved ritual humiliation, designed to destroy enemies' honor and social standing permanently. During these ceremonies, Eric would be displayed publicly as an example of what happened to those who opposed Viking authority. Entire settlements would gather to witness his degradation, which served both as entertainment and as warnings about consequences of resistance. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gamla Uppsala suggests that some Norse communities constructed specialized amphitheaters for public humiliation ceremonies. Eric was forced to perform in these structures that could accommodate hundreds of observers, displayed in degrading positions for extended periods, while communities celebrated around him. Religious dimensions of community intimate violence were particularly disturbing in their systematic organization. During fertility rituals dedicated to gods like Frey and Freya, Eric was forced to participate in ceremonies designed to ensure good harvests and successful raids. These religious obligations made his suffering not just entertainment, but holy duty. Seasonal festivals incorporated Eric's abuse as community entertainment. During winter solstice celebrations, warriors would compete to devise creative methods of humiliating him and other thralls. These events were family-friendly entertainment, where children learned that human suffering was cause for celebration and divine favor. The legal system reinforced community participation through requirements that free citizens witness certain rituals to validate their legal standing within Norse society. This meant that maintaining social status required participating in or observing Eric's systematic abuse, creating communities where empathy was not just discouraged, but legally prohibited. Most devastating for Eric was how these community practices escalated over time. Each generation of Vikings tried to surpass the previous one's cruelty to maintain social standing, leading to increasingly extreme forms of intimate violence that pushed the boundaries of human endurance while serving the economic and political needs of expanding Norse civilization. By his third year in captivity, Eric had become a permanent fixture at community gatherings. His body bore the scars of countless public ceremonies. His spirit so thoroughly broken that he would perform any demanded act without resistance. The village children who had watched his initial breaking were now young adults who used him for their own entertainment, perpetuating cycles of abuse that stretched across generations. What made Eric's story particularly tragic was how completely his former identity had been erased. He no longer remembered his father's face or his mother's voice. The English words came slowly now, replaced by Norse commands that had been beaten into him through years of conditioning. The boy who had dreamed of sailing to distant lands had become a living reminder of what those lands actually held for their victims. When Eric finally died during his fourth winter, worn out by years of systematic abuse, his death was noted only in Bjorn's account books as a loss of property worth 12 silver pieces. No grave marked his passing. No prayers were said for his soul. He simply disappeared. Another forgotten victim of a system that had refined human suffering into cultural tradition. The systematic concealment of Viking intimate practices began with medieval Christian chroniclers who couldn't reconcile their conversion narratives with documented reality of Norse behavior. When Icelandic saga writers began recording Viking history in the 12th and 13th centuries, they faced pressure from church authorities to sanitize accounts of practices deemed incompatible with Christian values and civilized society. Contemporary parallels exist in modern societies where intimate violence becomes institutionalized within military, religious, or political organizations. The same psychological mechanisms that allowed entire Viking communities to participate in systematic abuse continue to operate wherever power structures protect perpetrators, while silencing victims and normalizing degradation. Eric was 15 years old when he died in that Norse settlement, his body finally giving out after 4 years of systematic abuse that had destroyed everything that made him human. He represents thousands of real individuals whose suffering built the foundation of Viking expansion across medieval Europe, victims whose names we'll never know, but whose stories deserve more than historical footnotes. The religious justification of Eric's systematic torture reveals how easily spiritual beliefs can be corrupted to sanctify human cruelty and institutional abuse. When gods demand suffering as proof of devotion, entire societies can participate in systematic degradation while maintaining the illusion they're performing holy duties rather than committing crimes against fellow human beings. The economic integration of sexual slavery into Viking society demonstrates how quickly human trafficking can become normalized when it produces sufficient profit for those in power. The detailed accounting systems that recorded Eric's value like livestock show this wasn't aberrant behavior by individual monsters, but institutionalized abuse supported by entire civilizations and their legal frameworks. Perhaps most disturbing is how Eric's suffering was celebrated rather than hidden from view. Viking communities gathered to watch his degradation as entertainment. Children learned to see his pain as normal household management, and warriors competed to devise ever more creative methods of breaking his spirit. This wasn't shame-based cruelty, but proud tradition that defined Norse cultural identity for centuries. The ongoing romanticization of Viking culture represents historical denial that protects modern sensibilities while dishonoring the memory of victims like Eric. By sanitizing Viking history into tales of brave explorers and noble warriors, we participate in covering up systematic violence that shaped European development for over 1,000 years. Understanding Eric's forgotten horror reminds us that human dignity isn't guaranteed by civilization, but must be actively protected by people willing to confront uncomfortable truths about what our species is capable of. Inflicting when power goes unchecked, and cruelty becomes culturally celebrated as divine favor. Next time you see romanticized Vikings in popular media, remember Eric and the real human beings whose suffering built the foundation of Norse expansion. Their stories represent the ultimate warning about what happens when intimate violence becomes systematized, celebrated, and integrated into civilized society's fabric. If this glimpse into history's hidden darkness has left you wanting more, click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking chapter that history tried to erase. And if you found this exploration as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button so we can keep peeling back the layers together. These forgotten voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told.